Before I start, let me say again hello to everyone. Welcome to my new Stars of Data session, Spy on Your UI. And I'm really happy that you're here and that you're joining me on this session and that you decided to take this session. And I hope that you're going to learn something and you're going to take something away from the next hour, and it's going to be fun for you. Before I start with the presentation, let me introduce myself a little bit and give you some background about myself. My name is Christian Todte. I'm, as already mentioned, Frankfurt-based analytics consultant, and I've been working with Power BI for the last years. When I'm not working, I love to spend time in the kitchen because I'm a chef as a hobby, and I love cooking, preparing meals for my family. That's great. Or I'm playing around with the latest gadgets, unlike James Bond that you can see up in the corner there. I'm unfortunately have to get the gadgets myself, and I don't get them from Q, which is a little bit sad, but I love everything technical and fidgety, gadgety. That's what I'm really passionate about, next to data visualization and Power BI. So about this session, we are going to talk about M and how we can use M to get a date. And after this, you will probably be able to use M and use the Power Query editor to create a date table, and not necessarily only a date table, but a table from a blank query, and then create some data within the Power Query editor to play around with and to use for some data transformation. I've talked a lot about M. Who or what is M? M is obviously the boss of the MI6, but this is not the M that we're talking about. You might have guessed already, although the title might be a little bit misleading. But not unlike Ralph Fiennes' M, we're going to talk about an M that is giving instructions and keeping things in order. And this is an M, this is the language in Power Query that I want to present to you and give you some more information about. And if you have used Power Query before, or the Power Query editor, and if you have used some of the buttons that you find in the top row, I'm going to show that to you later. So if you don't know what I'm talking about now, you will during the demo session. If you have used that, you've already written some code. And now you might ask yourself, how have I written some code if I don't know it? That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of the Power Query editor. It does it for you. If you turn on one little button in the view section, you can see the code that is written behind the scenes. And if you use the button, for example, if you add a column, or if you transform a table to a list, you don't have to write let source equal wavy brackets 1.10. So you don't have to write all that. You just click the button. You select add new column, and then you're good to go. So we're going to have a look at what this looks like, and I'm going to show you what this looks like in the editor. And feel free to just follow along. And if you like, you can just follow all the examples that I'm doing, so you get a better understanding of what I'm really talking about. And with that, I'm going to jump into the demo. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a field, create a record, a list, and a table. And I'm going to explain to you what the differences are between those. So if we're starting from a blank query, I already pulled up the query editor. This is just what you get when you use the blank query option. It spins up the Power Query editor without anything in there. This is what I already prepared so that we don't lose too much time. And I'm going to show you how to create a field. This is really the simplest building block of everything that you have in the Power Query editor. So we're creating a new query, also blank. And what we're going to do is we're going to write a name. A name that relates to the topic, one of the most famous spies, I would think. So what happens, this is a field. What I just did is I've created a field with a string inside, with a string as a value, and you might have already seen that the icon changed here, which indicates that Power Query already knows what kind of value the field is holding. So that we don't get confused, let me name this field with string. And a string is not the only thing that we can create in a field, right? So I mentioned the data types gets detected, and I'm going to show the different data types that a field can hold. Not all of them, but just to give you a little bit of an idea what I'm talking about. So next to a field with a string, we can just duplicate this, create a field with a number. And we're going to rename this number. Just as I mentioned before, here you have the little icon. I hope that you can see it and it's not too small. You have the ABC icon that indicates we're dealing with a string, and the 1, 2, 3 that indicates we're dealing with a number. We're gonna add one more. We have the option to add a field and we'll fill it with a Boolean. So Boolean works as well. And name this thing. And we can do date or date time. So another one, and we're gonna put dates. And just to show you that the date time works as well, you can see you get the date time symbol, and the field knows it's a date time value. And if I get rid of the time, it converts back to date. So these are the options and the data types that we're going to look at. Just quickly name this field with date. And to keep things nice and tidy, we're going to create groups. This is something that I recommend when you're working with Power BI in basically any scenario. Create the groups to organize everything that you have as a query, so you can better keep them apart and be able to really track where you're at. So the first thing that we have had a look at is the fields. And we're going to put them in the fields. The next thing that I want to show you is a record, because a record is, I would say, the next bigger building block that we have, and the record is a set of fields. So it's a little bit different than the field itself. The field, we just write whatever value it should hold, and we get it right away. With a record, we have to use a different notation, right? So records needs square brackets, and I'm just going to create a record to show you what kind of data types you can hold in a record. So we have strings that we can have in a record, and we need to define the names of all the fields that we want to have in that record. So for a string, we use the quotation marks and put everything that we want to have in this field inside of the quotation marks. This is a record with only one information in there. If you want to expand the record or have more information in there, you can just anything that you can think of into the records. We can again add a number Okay. Didn't go correct. Let me just quickly grab it from somewhere. Go with a Boolean. So we can add a Boolean. Gonna figure out why the number didn't work. I think it was the notation, and also we can add dates. The thing with dates in this case, though, is that we can't add a date as we did before, because if we would try that, what happens? It gets read as a number. So if you want to put a date in there and use it as a date, you would have to first put it as a string, and then you transform it later on and use it as a date later down the line. Let's try the code name again. Yep, there we go. With the comma instead of the dot. That was the problem. So this is how you can create a record, and you can see it just adds a new line, a new row to the record with a name. If you click on it, if you click on a name, you already get the value of the field that the field is holding, not that the name is holding, right? So this is kind of already an information about how we can access that value afterwards. So this is a record, and we're going to put this in a new group called records. With a record, you can also go back to the field, and I want to show you that the record really just consists of fields. And if you want to have anything from this record, right? If you want to just drill down to one specific field, you just call the name of the record that you want to have a look at, and you're going back to the record itself, right? I called the code name. The code name is 007, and this is what I'm seeing here. Same. If I look at the name, I get the name. This will get a little bit clearer down the line. Now it just shows you that the notation for getting something from a record is the same as defining the record. So just in square brackets, calling the name, and then you get the value for whatever you have written in there. Keep this as a record. We're going to import another one. One of the most important records, at least for me, is one hidden gem of the Power Query editor, I would say, and it is called equals #shared. Some of you might already know that. What this does, what this record is giving you, is really beautiful, because this is just the whole set of all the functions that you can use within the instance of Power Query Editor that you're looking at. What do I mean by that? It shows you all the functions that are available in the Power Query Editor. If I would do the same thing in Excel, I would get a different set of functions, because not all the functions that you have in the Power Query Editor with Power BI Desktop are the same as the ones that you have within Excel, for example. So this gives you basically the whole documentation about everything that you can use within the Power Query that you're using right now, which is wonderful, because you don't have to leave and look for the documentation outside, or check the documentation on the website, where there is good documentation, obviously, from Microsoft. But this keeps it all in one single place. And this is great. And I'm using it basically every time that I need to look up something. So this helps you, and it gives you also the information about all the queries that you have written, and the values that the fields or the queries are holding, which you can see here. So everything that I've created so far is displayed up at the top. Now, how can I use this? This is not really a really good way to navigate through this. I have to turn it into a table, and now we're using one of the buttons that I mentioned in the beginning. So if I turn this into a table, I can see the code that gets written is rather simple. It's called record.toTable. So to turn a record into a table, I just have to call whatever record I have and put record.toTable. I have made a table from it. So I have now headers. I have the rows as sorted in columns and rows. So this is really useful once I want to check what the fields are holding, because I can filter and use this as a normal table. And just to show you what I mean is, if I wouldn't have known that record.toTable is the code that I need to use, I'm just going to search. I have record.toList, record.toTable, and I have the definition of the function itself. So if you click on the function, you get taken to the window where you can use the function right away, and you get an example how the function works. So this is really, really useful to check on everything that you're writing, and it will enhance your capabilities of data manipulation if you use that. And look at the code here and then modify and tweak it a little bit down the line. Let's get rid of these steps though, so that we go back to the record. This is what I like to show you about a record. And just to have it handy, I'm going to create the field that I'm accessing from the record again. So duplicate this, and then we're drilling down to license kill. And we're renaming this field from. The next thing I want to show you is a list, and this is rather self-explanatory. Probably all of you have an idea what a list is. A list is a list of values. So what's the difference between the record and the list? I'm going to show you the notation is different, and the way we handle the values inside that list is a little bit different. For a list, we're going to create a new group, call it lists. Let's spell that correctly. Lists, and we're going to use that. A list we're defining with wavy brackets. If you've used Python or anything like that before, you probably know the notation already. And we can write any kind of value that we have in a record in a list as well. So we can write different data types. Again, let's take the name again. And with a comma, you just add a list, and there you have it. We can hold different data types. We can add Boolean. And the same that goes for the record also goes for the list. If you want to have a date and you write it in a way that you wrote it in the field, it will read it as a number. So dates also have to be written as strings to be for you to be able to use them really later on in the transformation. So I already created a list. I'm going to grab that and put this here. So this is a list of all the missions of our favorite spy list. And this is the list of missions. And we are just going to create one more. As I mentioned, I really love gadgets. I'm going to create a list of all the gadgets, or it's not all the gadgets because that would be a really long list, but some of the gadgets that James Bond is getting from Q in his movies. So list of gadgets. And this is how we create lists. If we want to drill down now, like we've done that before in a record, it's also a little bit different from what we've done in a record, right? You can see the difference of the icon already shows you that this is only one column. And with this one column, we can try and just like we did before, try to access what is in the first row, and it already throws an error because the index is not really one that we can use. It's just indicating which line we are on. We don't have a name that we could call, so this doesn't work. How we are going to get to one of the values that this is holding is we're going to have to call its position within the list. And we're doing this with a zero index, zero-based index. So 0 is the first value that the list is holding. If you're writing anything else in there, you can grab the position, or rather the field from the position within the list, just by using the wavy brackets as well. So it's a really the same notation for defining the list is helping us getting the list. Same goes for the record. We've seen that before. We're gonna duplicate this and rename this so that we can use this later on. This is field from list. Now we're turning this back into that. And this is how we're gonna deal with lists. There's two more things that I want to show you about lists because it has a special feature, so to speak. A list can be created with 2 dots. And what do I mean by that? We can create a long list with 4 signs, actually. Okay. So 2 dots mean that the list gets created from numbers, and you just have to put in the starting number, the end number, and Power Query does the rest. This works for numbers, so list from numbers. We're going to call this. It works for strings, but only for single character strings. So if I put A to Z, we get the alphabet. And we have to define them as strings so that Power Query knows what we're trying to achieve. List from strings. So this is the 2 shortcuts that you have with list from numbers, list from strings, and this is going to help us later on when we're creating a date table, because a date table starts basically with a list of dates, or we can think about it as a list of dates. So this is one of the things that we're going to use. One thing to mention is that this only works in one direction. So if I put Z to A, I get an empty list. And the same goes for numbers. If you put a larger number in the beginning, it doesn't count down, but it's just giving us an empty list. So it only works in one direction in this way. And this is the one tricky thing, or the one little use case for creating a list with the dots. The last thing, and the most complex, but also probably the one that you all know, is a table that I want to show you. So we're going to create a table from what we already created so far. And we can think of a table as just lists concatenated, or rows transformed. And why am I saying this? Because the way that we're accessing fields from a table is a little bit different than I would access a field from a list or from a record. And it actually changes around. So let me show you what I mean. This table, right? And we're using the lists of missions to create this table. So we're using this of missions. And again, we had record to table, right? Now we're doing the list to table. And with this little button, we can actually grab the code. We could also look it up. In this case, we need a little bit more information in there. So we'll just use the button and see that the source, the list, just gets converted into a table. And we're going to add a column. A column 1. This is rather simple. And instead of adding the 1 here, and this is where it really gets useful. Now we're combining what we've done before and actually taking some of the code that gets written by Power Query Editor and combining it with the code that we have written so far. So we are taking the list of gadgets and expanding this. And now we have a table that gets a little bit more interesting with all the gadgets that are connected to the movies. And we can see that in Casino Royale, for example, we have the homing pill that informed the MI6 about the location of James Bond. And this is an easy way to just really kind of play around with the Power Query Editor and with the command line. So this is really, really helpful, in my opinion. And we're going to put this into a new group that is called tables. As I said, now that we have this table, the navigation gets a little bit different. So if you want to go to get the first column, what we do is actually we use the notation that we would use for getting a record or a value from a record, and we're getting it from our table. And you can see that the notation is the record notation, and the result of the record notation actually gives us a list. And vice versa. If we're trying to go and get a row from this table, we're actually using the notation that returns a value or a field from a list. So if I'm using the zero-based index again, I get a record. And I get a record of the first row, or the first row gets turned into a record. So you can see really this is the building blocks that everything is made of. And now knowing this, we can probably guess already how we can go to any certain value or any singular value and field within any table by just calling the position and then going into the name. And if we want to have the cigarette gun, we're calling now custom, and we're getting to the cigarette gun from the table. So we're navigating first from the table to the list and to the record, and then to the specific part of the record. And this is actually interchangeable, so you can also do this the other way around and call the record first and do this. So it doesn't matter which you want to put first, but this is how you get from a table actually to one specific value or to one specific field. And if you want to use that for further data manipulation, and you can now use this and fill different fields, have queries that are based on the field. So this will give you an enormous power, I would say, to manipulate your data in other ways than just using the buttons at the top. Also, we've seen how we can create a list or a record from basically anything that we have. So from any starting point, may it be a record, may it be a table, may it be a list, may it be a field, we can transform into every other part or every other option that we have and use that as an input for our functions that we're going to look up later on. So if we're going back to the functions here, it always gives us an information about what we need to put as an input. Sometimes you will need to have a list as an input, and sometimes you will need to have a record as an input or a singular field. And now with that, knowing how to navigate from one to another, we can use any of those functions basically to create data manipulations that go really beyond what we can use the interface for.
Christian, 1 second just to interrupt. Are you able to make the text in the function, the formula bar, a little bigger? Not sure if that's possible or not.
That might be a little bit hard.
Control and mouse scroll.
Control and mouse scroll.
But it doesn't work.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, I can. Nope. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Then yeah, let's get back to what we had here.
If I can just interrupt there for 1 second, but control and mouse scroll actually works for the attendees. So you cannot do it as the presenter, but if it's too small for attendees, they can actually zoom in with control and mouse scroll. I think that's also what Augustine meant.
Oh, perfect. So does it work for you?
Yes, that works for me.
Okay, great.
Good tip.
So again, we're adding the list of gadgets. Okay, and this is a table, and we've shown you how to actually access. I've shown you how to access a list from a table and access a record from a table, and this is basically now all the building blocks that we need, right? What we want to do now is go from a blank query to getting a table that holds date values. And we've seen that we can create a list, and I've already mentioned that a list is actually the starting point for our date table because the date table starts with a list of dates. And what we could think is that just taking this list and maybe putting in a date might work as a solution for that. And we're just gonna try that. Let's put it in here. And we're gonna try and get 1 month. Oops, this string. And I already kind of gave it away earlier on. As a string, it only works with single character strings. Exactly what it says here. If I now try and define this as a number, we've already seen that in a list, dates don't get recognized as dates. So I would have to have it as a number. And you probably know what we're going to see. It doesn't work with that either. So how are we going to solve that? What we can do is we can grab a field with a date and convert this date into a number. Because with all the dates, they're basically just converted days that we're counting from the 31st of December 1899. So if we're looking at this date, we're duplicating it and calling this a starting date. And we're now converting this into a table and changing the data type to a number. We can see that we have 44,638 days since the 31st of December 1899. And this is actually what we're going to use. And I think most of you might have already guessed it. By just using the transformation, we can now put in a date, transform it, and then use the little trick that we used with the numbers as the starting point for our date table. So to make sure that this is working, though, let's see if we can put in a starting number, and we're duplicating this, and we're creating a starting number and an end number. So starting number is 1, and end number is, I'm just quickly going to rename this. Number, and we're going to create an end number 10. Ending number, and let's see if this works as expected. So if we put in the starting number, this is the starting date, and the end number, do we get the list? And voila, it's working. So this is an option of it's confirming. This is an option that we can use. So we have the possibility to not only use this with the explicit value, but on also referring it to a value that that I have defined before. Now we have a starting date, and we're going to create an end date. Ending date. And so that we're not using tables in our fields pane, we're going to convert them back to just fields, and we're going to create a table by using the command that we've used before and that we've already seen. So record dot to table. And I've already said it. We have to convert this to a record first, which is as easy as putting this into brackets and giving it a name. This is the start date. As a string. And same goes for the end date as a string. Date. We have the starting date, we have the end date, and we have record to table. So if with record to table, we're calling record as a record, we're calling the starting date record. starting date, and adding an equal sign. We are going to get the start date. So we're calling this starting date. Start date table. And we're doing the same thing for the end date table. I've misspelled there. And now we have actually the point where we can take this and transform it, because the data transformation we can easily do in with the UI from a table, right? It's just the drop-down button, create a whole number from this, and this shows us one of the problems that happens when you use a different notation every time. So we have to change the notation in here, the date, and we are going to add a month. This should then, give us the correct number. Let me pull this from here. Okay. And we're changing the type back and creating actually first a date from there. And now we're creating a number. And we're getting the correct number. Same goes for this one. We've changed it. We have to change it to a date and change it to a number. It's stuck, unfortunately. If this is stuck, I'll just pull this one over. You can still see my screen, correct?
We can still see the Power Query editor, yep.
Yeah, we have the starting date, we have the end date, and now we can use the list of dates. Just gonna duplicate this. Get rid of that. And we're gonna get the starting date table and ending date table. End date table. There we go. And we have to, it says we can't access the table, so we have to check where in the date table actually the value lies that we're trying to use. It's starting date and 1 and end date and 1. So we're just gonna go to the correct spot, the correct field. Start date. And end date. Date and this should be correct. End date and starting date. So, dates, and there we go. Now we've created from the table by just accessing the correct field. So we have, as an input, we have a table. We're navigating in the table to the field that we're trying to use to actually use this shortcut function that we have with a list. And we're creating a list that consists of all the days that are from a simple field with starting date to a field with end date. So this is a 1 year difference, right? We created a list. And we're going to rename this list of dates. Now, this we can put into, we've seen that before, we could use the button, but let's just write it out, table from list. Hopefully this will work, otherwise we're just gonna use the button and then not write the source, but take it. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to actually keep track of all the commas and everything in there. I think you can relate. So we can get rid of the source, and we can see that I exchanged the source for the code that we've seen here. So this is actually not necessary. This is optional values. We could check that in the record equals #shared. So we're getting the list. We're transforming the list into a table, and we're doing what we've did before. And we could also write the code now from what we've seen, transforming a date to a number. So it works the other way around as well. And we're arriving at a point where we can see that we have now just a list in a table that consists of all the dates that we can access and change by just changing the number here. So it works basically like a parameter, and you could do it with a parameter actually. Just to show you that it works, we're gonna put in 2000. And if this is now the table that we're referring to, we're taking this field, creating a record from it, using the record to create a list, and then we're putting this into a list. So we've found a rather complicated way to create from a field list of tables. And this is not to show you that it's possible to create the list of dates and a date table just from scratch, but we can use everything in the interface and manipulate all the functions that we're getting right away and that we don't have to write, and just add in some of the code that we've written, add some of the fields that we've created, and change the outcome drastically. Right? It's not gotta admit, it's not the best way to actually create a date table, because with the equals #shared, we can look at another way, and this is what makes it so great. So let's check dates. So we already have a function that is list dates. With that, we could have done this way easier, but it's more about the process and about identifying steps that you can use within different options. So if you want to create a date table, you don't have to go this way, this rather complicated way to navigate from one to the other, but you can now see and follow along that there is options to modify the code that Power Query writes for you and actually use it in a different way than it is intended from the UI itself. So just to show you a list of dates, this would give us already the same outcome 20, and we're going to do a day. So this is the same outcome. It's way easier, but there's not always going to be a function that fulfills everything that you need, correct? So with the steps now, you will be able to take this ready-made functions and really move them around and give a bit of more power to you by using M and using this as a starting point. Okay, just a second. I'll close this down because we're coming to the end of the presentation. Sorry. What we've done so far is we've created a start date, an end date. We've created a list with a start date and end date. We've transformed it into a table, and we changed the data type. So from a blank query, from nothing in our Power Query editor, we've created a date table that gives us the option to now add days and add weeks as we like. We've looked at the differences between a field, a record, a list, and a table, and how we can navigate within the field, record, list, and table, and how we get the values from a field, and how we can combine these with the ready-made options of the data transformation that we're seeing. And in the end, we've created a date table from a blank query. And with that, I want to say thanks for spending some time with me here, and I hope you learned something. I hope there's some useful stuff in there that you can use. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Great job, Christian. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. One of them was around what sources you use to learn M and whether you can share some that you prefer.
Well, so actually, that's a really great question. The sources to learn M are really what I showed you here. So the equals hashtag shared is already a really nice documentation about everything that you can do. When I started using M, there wasn't a good documentation on the Microsoft Learn website. Now you can find a lot, and it's a really, I think it's a really good set of information. And let me go back. I think I have the link here. So the Microsoft Docs is really good on M now. You can learn a lot from there, but also just doing what I did right now. Just think about a data manipulation that you want to do, and then try to create that without using the buttons. Just by checking, okay, if I want to add a column, I'll just check in equals hashtag shared, what is the command for adding a column? And then I see, okay, can I add this by just writing the code? What is the necessary information that I need to put in there? And by that, you have a hands-on learning experience, at least from my point of view. That's always helpful, maybe not the fastest way, but once you really get into it, you'll be able to manipulate it way better.
Awesome. I think we had one more query, and that was, where would we need Power Query in the EDW environment?
I think, I mean, it really depends on your whole architecture, right? So a lot of the transformation stuff can already, if you have a data warehouse in the back end, you will have most of the transformation there. You will, if you're lucky, you will have a lot of logic already implemented, and you don't need to do as much as, for example, if you're looking at a smaller project where you have scattered data sources that are not connected and are not cleaned and are not really well designed, but you have some Access databases somewhere flying around and some Excel somewhere laying on a SharePoint, and for that, Power Query is wonderful because you're really fast in building something that is automated, right? Of course, you always need to take care and be able to create a structure behind it that can hold all the logic that you're creating, because the more complicated it gets, the easier it breaks in the end. But this is really something that you can build really fast, and yeah, for all the times that you don't have a really good model that you can already consume and use, I think this would be a perfect use case for Power Query. I hope that answers the question.